this restaurant, or what used to be this restaurant here. This was a restaurant called Fox's, and it was a community staple since 1955. It was originally an old home here, and then they converted it to a restaurant in 55, and then it was essentially a restaurant ever since. And it was beloved by the community here until it eventually burned down in the fire last year. And Paul Rosenblum, the co-owner of this restaurant, says that while he really does want to bring this restaurant back, they're not certain it's going to be in this exact location because of a number of reasons. It was a small space, and then to bring the building up to code and rebuild it, they would have to reduce their capacity by about a third, and it just really doesn't make a ton of sense. And I think that's what a lot of business owners are grappling with right now here in Altadena, a year after the fires. A lot of insurance payments have been paid out. People are getting their money, and they're kind of faced with, is it the right time and place to rebuild? So I want to show you what this neighborhood or what this area looks like here. So you can see where the Army Corps of Engineers cleared the restaurant. They cleared the rubble. It looked like just a pile of ashes, and it's been sort of reduced to concrete. And then you can see there was likely a business next door. That's also been cleared away except for the concrete walls. And then you have several, we've got blocks essentially of buildings that once stood here but now are no longer. Around 16,000 structures burned down in both the Palisades and Eaton fires. This was a firestorm across Los Angeles back in January 1 year ago. The Palisades fire that started up near Pacific Palisades to the west of us, and then we're over to the east near the mountains here that sort of border Los Angeles. That's where a lot of the fire occurred here. The Eaton fire, it started near Eaton Canyon, which is a canyon that runs up into the mountains there. And these fires were incredibly destructive. Again, more than 16,000 structures destroyed. Most of them were homes. So many lives were completely upturned by these fires, and a lot of people lost their lives. I believe 31 people died in the Eaton Palisades fire. Here in Altadena, 19 people died. Over in Pacific Palisades, 12 people died, or at least the Palisades fire. And a year later, people are struggling to rebuild. There's been a lot of concerns about the red tape that's been involved in the rebuilding process. California Governor Gavin Newsom, he's been trying to, reduce the amount of roadblocks that people are faced with when it comes to the rebuilding process. But still, only 1 in 5 of the homes that burned down in the Palisades and Eaton fires have permits that have been approved. So there's still a long way to go with the permitting process. And then there's a long way to go when it comes to just the rebuilding of a lot of the businesses that were burned down in these fires. The economic toll of these fires were immense because we're not only talking about the immediate burn scar area, we're also talking about the areas that were evacuated or had smoke damage. So LA County, they put out some stats. The Palisades and Eaton fires impacted around 6,800 businesses and more than 47,000 workers. And so, according to these statistics from Los Angeles County, they estimate that between 2025 and 2029, there's going to be an economic output loss, so an overall economic loss between $5.2 and $10.1 billion between the communities of Altadena and Pacific Palisades due to these fires. So we're talking about folks who have lost their jobs, businesses that have burned down and they won't be generating economic activity, lost revenue, things like that. So a tremendous loss that's taken place here. But you can see that this is what so many folks are left with right now. Business owners essentially having to rebuild from scratch. And here at Fox's, the owner, Paul Rosenblum, or the co-owner, Paul Rosenblum, he was lucky. He had fire insurance. He was able to relocate his workers, the 15 workers from the restaurant, to his other restaurants. He owns 2 other restaurants in the Los Angeles area. But he still just doesn't know if it'll be right to rebuild in this exact spot. And these are situations that are faced with other business owners as well. We also talked to the owner of a bike shop, Steve's Bike Shop, just around the corner. And during the fires, he was faced with just a crazy situation. He was going around essentially going to his neighbors' places and putting out the fires with garden hoses. He actually was on the front page of the LA Times in the wake of the fires. A famous photo of him on the roof of one of his neighbors' houses, just fighting the fire with a garden hose. But one building that he wasn't able to save was the building that belonged to his bike shop. So he was a renter there, and his bike shop burned to the ground. He's had to move his bike shop about 40 miles to the west over in Simi Valley. So he took over an existing bike shop there that was going out of business, and so now he's running that. He was helped out by GoFundMe. He was able to keep his 2 employees working, and now he's hoping one day to come back to Altadena. He's a 5th generation resident here in Altadena, and he's hoping to come back here. But the real big question though is, when is the right time to come back? When's the right time to build? Because you can see, there is some construction that's going on, but really not a whole lot. I mean, you can see that one structure's popped up over there, but we used to be surrounded here by homes, by businesses, and there just really isn't that community that used to exist here. So, for when it comes to a store like a bike shop, you meet folks in the neighborhood and come by, it just doesn't really exist anymore. So it's almost a catch-22 for some folks when they're trying to decide, okay, should we rebuild? Is there enough of a customer base? Because I talked to Paul Rosenbluh, again, the co-owner of Fox's restaurant here, and he said, he wants to be a part of this community, but if he rebuilds and nobody comes, well, then he's just another failed business, and he'll have built this back for really nothing. So a really tough situation for a lot of folks who are trying to rebuild their lives, trying to move back, but they're faced with a whole lot of obstacles. I do want to talk a little bit about just what this day means for me too, because a year ago I was also covering this fire. I was working out of the Los Angeles bureau, the Fox News LA bureau, and we saw this plume of smoke rising up to the west over in Pacific Palisades. And initially, a local fire like that doesn't necessarily rise to national news coverage. But as the day progressed and as the weather really started to turn, we saw these winds starting to blow, the fire started to spread out of control, and we saw that fire grow into these neighborhoods. That's when it was very clear that this was going to be a national news story. And then when the Eaton fire here in Altadena broke out, and that also started to just rage out of control, again fueled by the dry conditions, very, very strong winds, this turned into a firestorm, and it turned into the event that we saw unfold. Again, 31 lives lost, absolutely heartbreaking. And just the scenes that we saw, when we were out there in the field and we were out there reporting on this, it was shocking. I remember myself and Thomas Haas, photographer, Marcus Mulick, my field producer, we were driving along Pacific Coast Highway, and this is a drive that's so iconic and that everybody in the LA area has done, and there's these homes that go alongside PCH, and driving along this stretch of iconic roadway and seeing these homes that were burnt to the ground or were on fire, it was shocking. It was truly paradise that had been lost. And that has been kind of the sentiment from so many people, especially those who live in Malibu, Pacific Palisades, here in Altadena. It's like they had these wonderful, perfect communities that in an instance were turned to ash. There in the years since has been a lot of political infighting and the blame game, figuring out who is to blame for what happened here. But just from a meteorological standpoint, this was an extreme circumstance. We had a very dry winter last year, very different from this winter where we had a lot of rain. We had a very dry winter, and so those dry conditions combined with those offshore Santa Ana winds that were just ripping created a really dangerous situation for people here in Southern California. And it created a situation where firefighters essentially had no chance. They couldn't fly their fixed-wing aircraft or their helicopters, and it was an awful just series of events that unfolded. You know, you had a loss of pressure in some of the hydrants that unfolded because you had water mains that were breaking in homes. You had so many fire engines pumping out of hydrants at the same time, and you had this fire that went from block to block to block, and it looked like, I know that it's a cliche, but it did look like a war zone. You were there, you know, in the days, the weeks afterwards, and you looked out all around you, and all you could see was this grid of smoldering remains where neighborhoods had once been. And this is what it looks like, you know, 1 year later. You can see we've had some rain, so we've got some puddles in these empty lots. But, you know, you just kind of look around and you see remnants of lives that work, you know. You've got the remains of foundations. You have some areas where it looks like we've got some rebuilding that's been going on here. But it's just pretty incredible. You know, you see a lot of driveways, you know, leading to streets, driveways to nowhere. And how long is it going to take before Altadena, before Pacific Palisades actually come back to what they once were? Will they ever come back to what they once were? I think these are a lot of questions that folks have. But you know, I'm going to turn it over and see if anybody has any questions for me. Again, you know, I'm a business reporter, so I've been focusing mainly on the economic impact and the economic toll that this has had on the communities, but also in the just immediate aftermath of these fires, we were focusing on just the nuts and bolts, what was going on, trying to get the news out. So we got Lloyd, who's so graciously been holding the camera and walking around with me, and Lloyd's gonna read off some questions if there are any.
How long is the estimate to rebuild?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. You know, how long is the estimate to rebuild these communities? I don't think that there is really a firm estimate. Right now, where things stand, there's about 1/5 the number of homes that were destroyed that have gotten a permit approved. There's more than 3,000 permits that are undergoing the approval process right now. You know, I think there's been some frustration from residents that the permitting process has not been faster. There have been some regulations that have been waived, environmental regulations, to try to get things speeding up. But, you know, I think for folks that are anxious to get back home, it's not going fast enough.
Do residents think it will be the same?
I think that's a great question too. Do residents think that it's going to be the same? You know, I've got friends who have been impacted by these fires. You know personally people who had their homes burned down. And I think that to believe that this is going to be the same, I don't think that people think it's going to be exactly the same as it was, because anytime you have a big disaster like this, you're going to have folks who are moving away, who just can't really stand to be here anymore. And then just the character of the community is going to be different, especially here in Altadena. A lot of these homes were built in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s. They were old homes, and you can't really recreate a lot of these old homes like they once were. There are codes, different codes now, and you have to build to those codes. And so it's going to look pretty different. I know that there have been different architectural plans that have been rolled out that try to still capture the flavor of the community, a lot of these architectural styles. So I think that they're going to try to retain that, but I don't think it's going to be the same as it once was.
Do we know the origins of the fire here?
Yeah, so when it comes to the origins of the Eaton fire, that's been pinned down to transmission lines that were run by SoCal Edison. That's the electricity company here. Actually, if we can kind of pan over towards the mountains, it's tough to see from where we are right here. But in those mountains, there's a series of transmission lines. And what occurred, or what's believed to have occurred, is there was an abandoned transmission line, and somehow there was a charge of electricity that went through these abandoned transmission lines, and that's what sparked the fire. There was some surveillance footage that was taken at a gas station and it caught that on camera. And so it was at the base of one of these transmission towers where that was where the fire spread out. And so it spread from there. We had these downslope winds that pushed the fire into these neighborhoods at the base of the mountains that you can see behind me. So that's what occurred here at the Eaton fire that was sparked near the Eaton Canyon area here in Altadena. Over to the west of us in Pacific Palisades, that fire was rekindled. It's believed it rekindled from a fire that was sparked on New Year's Day of last year, of 2025. That was caused by arson or by fireworks that were shot off in a park area. And so essentially firefighters extinguished that initial blaze. But what sometimes happens with these wildfires is that, the fire will burn a certain area and then it'll get into the root system of maybe trees or dense shrubs. And so what was going on is that this fire, it was still burning underneath the ground. And then you had these really strong dry winds whip up these embers, and then you got the fire in Pacific Palisades. So those are the two suspected causes of the fires right there.
Did the Palisades fire, did it bleed into Altadena?
The Palisades fire and the Eaton fire, those two fires never connected, but they both burned through essentially the same geographical formation. You can see this mountain range here. It carries on over to over to the mountains, over to the coast. So they were burning along the same topographical feature, I guess you could say, but they never connected. But the two similarities in the two fires is that they both started in more wildland area, and then they burned into urban areas. And, so here in Altadena, started in the mountains back there, burned on into the neighborhoods and into very densely populated areas, and then the same thing happened in Pacific Palisades. And that fire, it burned through the communities of Malibu, so unincorporated Los Angeles County there, and it burned right up to the Pacific Ocean. So this was really a two-headed firestorm here. So that seems like those are all the questions that we have. I really appreciate you guys tuning in and watching and just hearing about my experience covering this. I am the son of two CAL FIRE firefighters, and so being able to tell this story, I do have a little bit of a connection to fighting fire in California and obviously to this community. I live here. I'm connected to Southern California, and it's really is heartbreaking seeing all the loss. But it is uplifting to see how many people have come together in the wake of these fires and to see these communities try to build back. So, obviously we wish nothing but the best for everybody out here, and we're going to continue to document as they try to rebuild. So thank you guys all, and we'll talk to you again soon.